reality here where the economy we are reported, we're told rather, is growing at a record level of about 5-6%, but the reality on the ground is fundamentally different. People are scouting for employment opportunities which they cannot get. Cost of living is skyrocketing, the cost of doing business is rising, and at the grassroots, doing business across counties is being highlighted as a key challenge being faced by the private sector. So this is now a matter we want to take a deep dive into, and I'm joined, as I said, by Billow Kerrow. Welcome on set.
Thank you.
The question we're asking tonight is, where is the money? I'd like to know your thoughts.
Well, the money, one, has gone to the Chinese. We all know about it. It's a huge debt, largely to the Chinese. And secondly, it has gone to the government executive. They have stolen it. That's where the money has gone. It's either gone to the Chinese or it's gone to the pockets of the people who run the country. And so I agree. I mean, the last couple of years or 3 years or so, Kenyans have realized that the 5 to 6. In fact, our economy has been stagnant for the last 8-9 years at 5 to 6%. But in some of the earlier years, that 5 to 6% was growth in real areas, like agriculture or and sectors that really impact on the Kenyans. But this 5 to 6% in the last couple of years is what I normally call the elitist economy. This is the communication sector, the financial sector, or sectors which do not impact on the majority of Kenyans. So you get into a situation where then the government says the economy is growing on paper, yes, but in reality it's not. And I think many of the the reasons that have been given in the clips you have aired justify that, and I think we need to look at them.
Billow Kerrow, you're pointing to a structural challenge that we have with the economy, but let me get to the subject of tax revenue. And on the one hand, Kenyans say we are overtaxed. On the other hand, KRA is not meeting its revenue targets. Why do we have this situation in our day-to-day?
It's about the government living beyond its means. That's it. You must cut your clothes to your size. If the government says we want 3 trillion and the economy can only raise 1.5 trillion, I mean, you can't blame the KRA or the revenue collection. It's about what target did you set for your expenditure. There is no attempt by this government to rationalize its expenditure in the last 7-8 years. In fact, they kept on increasing their government expenditures, not just in various state corporations and institutions that have been created, but I think largely on, what happened is that when government is not reducing in size, and every day you've seen people being recruited, the government has been really expanding in size and getting into some of those activities which don't necessarily result in revenue generation. For example, when this SGR story came up, the argument of the government is that we need to invest in this infrastructure so that in the long term we'll get higher revenue flows. That has not realized, that has not materialized. In fact, it's the opposite has happened in not only on the SGR but in many of these huge investments that have been made on infrastructure for the last 10 years. There hasn't been corresponding return, and I think there's a study that has been done by Parliamentary Budget Office that critically revealed that problem. So then what happens is that all that money you're putting into that infrastructure is largely borrowed.
Okay.
For example, last year our total development expenditure, national government, was 390 billion from ordinary revenue, the revenue that we generate. The rest, about 250 billion, was coming from loans. So what happens is that you borrow and spend. Budgets used to be very interesting when ministers or the government used to struggle to try and balance based on the fiscal policies, try and look at taxation, try and look for revenue generation and balance with expenditure. Now you don't. Now you set your expenditure, I want 3 trillion.
But Billow, if I could hold you then really in defense of the National Treasury, and not that I hold brief for them, supplementary budget one last year scaled down the revenue projections, tried to scale down expenditure. If you look at the budget policy statement which has just been tabled, there's a proposal 100 billion shilling slash on expenditure. Don't you think the fiscal consolidation agenda, there's an effort towards it?
No. Look at our budgeting system. The last 3 years, they do a budget, it gets approved by Parliament in June. 1 month later, in August, we're going for austerity. We have to review the budget. I think in 2018 we actually had 2 supplementary budgets, you remember. There is no time the last 3 years that this government has done a budget and it ran for 6 months. Immediately a month or 2 later, they're in crisis. You have to, freeze expenditure, austerity measures, review the budget. I mean, they have done that, and so I'm not surprised that in the final budget policy statement that they gave, then they had, there's an attempt to. The reason is obvious. It's just that in the next 9 months, 1 trillion shillings in loans will mature.
Yeah.
Last year, this is 2019-2020. The amount of interest alone for servicing the loans was 441 billion in the budget. So you are saying by December by next year, this government will need 1.5 trillion just to service loans. So you can understand why then they have to try and reduce development expenditure, and the impact on reduction of development expenditure would be adverse really on the economy, because and it's obvious, because when the economy is depressed, the last thing you should do is to try and contract the economy by trying to reduce demand, trying to reduce government expenditure, because government is the largest expenditure or stimulator in the economy. And so when you find then because of and this is created by these poor policies for the last 4 or 5 years of trying to borrow excessively.
Okay.
And so I think it's unfortunate, but they seem to be in a catch-22, because they can't. And the second thing is that if they were to borrow domestically, then it's also hurting the economy.
Yes.
Significantly. So this is why I understand that they have to try and reduce. But even then, it's really very marginal. I mean, this government's expenditure is still 2.8 trillion.
Okay.
And our revenues estimated next year, for next financial year, is 1.8. Still, there's a gap of 1 trillion. I mean, we're still living way beyond our means.
Beyond our means.
Yeah.
And my final bit, just to get to the tail end really, very briefly, when you look at the private sector, to its defense, the government will tell us, okay, fine, we got the rate cap repealed. We're seeing credit uptake by the private sector is ticking up. What's your assessment of the situation?
You see, the private sector has serious challenges. For example, when we look at our private sector, the largest aspect of it is really in the manufacturing. One of the challenges we've always had is the competitiveness in the market, regionally and so forth. And this challenge is because of the high cost of production. This government, of Jubilee, for the last 7 years, their main arguments have been that we'll reduce the cost of production. One, through lowering the cost of energy. It hasn't really happened significantly. I mean, manufacturing, it doesn't really. Number two, freight charges, for example. This whole SGR cost was about reducing freight charges. It hasn't really helped us. We're still paying more or less the same costs. And so this is why you find companies relocating. And this is why, third, the issue of taxation. Really, I mean, you don't, in a situation like this, try to tax more, because what happens then, the companies do not expand. Instead, everyone is trying to to keep their heads above the water, so they're cutting down expenditure. We're sending employees home. Companies are rationalizing, and then when the wage, that also affects the company. So I think private sector is really struggling, and that can be seen on the performance on even the blue chip. You see NSE this year, it's worst performance in so many years. But outside NSE, the situation is worse. In the informal sector, companies, small service companies that Kenyans have survived on, people are folding. Companies have been folding, and they're not being reported in large numbers, and so on, putting many people out. And the reason is you've taxed people. Those high taxes were not necessary. What the government needs to do, and this thing, the solution cannot come from anywhere else other than the government really rationalizing its expenditure.
Let me hold you on that and ask you my final question. The cost of living, inflation is now up to 6%. Some concluding thoughts from you.
Our inflation rate can be misleading. If it remains at 6%, 5-6%, but the reality is the one that affects the cost of living. For example, maize prices, according to the parliamentary budget, last 1 year, 2019, it went up by 30%. But you don't see it. When you look at the it went between 5 to 6%. You don't see it because it's distorted by the other the other parameters in the basket. Things like fuel prices not going up and sometimes going down, and other so and the rentals and the going down and so forth. So, but in reality, the food prices have been going up significantly, and that is the thing which really counts. And others, things like medical, things like the schools. Those are the things which really are hurting Kenyans most, and they've really been going up.
I see.
Yeah.
All right. And thank you very much. We've been having our conversation with the former chairperson of the Senate Finance Committee, Billow Kerrow, taking a deep